extent. So I'm understating the extent of the problem. But by multiplying the debt further and imposing this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation all the while, we have this ever-escalating sum of artificial falsified indebtedness, where instead we would have mathematically perfected economy. So this AA rating is a lie. It's a terrible lie. It's a preposterous lie. AA is not even close to the truth. It isn't A. It isn't triple B or B or
yeah. Why not? They
C
give it
or D or it's F.
They give it.
F
They give
is
it
the bottom of the scale because it's inevitable failure.
They give it 3 A's. Why not 10? But in fact, really, what it is one of the quotes that I think you sent me there. There's a term called, and it has a sort of a sound to it that will remind you of another word. I believe it's pronounced usufruct. So if you get nothing, if you're listening and you get absolutely nothing else out of this, listen to this. Usufruct, and correct me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but I think that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
From Roman law, the right to enjoy others' property short of the destruction or waste of its substance. And of course use is use, and fructus is fruit. So in other words, to enjoy the fruits of others illegally or by robbery or by pillage or by plunder. So usufruct. So it's not a triple A, it's not a double A, it's just usufruct.
Yes, and my what I adduce from scriptural references to usury or interest is that all of these things are to be understood from the crime. So it was like left to us to unravel this at some day because it isn't explained in Scripture, the mechanics. It's left to man to be tempted to do wrong to himself by standing by apathetically while our own promissory obligations to each other are obfuscated into an entirely unwarranted and unjustifiable process which multiplies our obligations to each other into a terminal sum of falsified artificial indebtedness to a purported banking system which isn't a banking system, that is, according to the concept of a storehouse, at all. It's a modern implementation of this changing of money into something which is totally destructive. And why is it so evil? It's evil not just because it dispossesses a people in a relatively short time, in part of a lifetime generally. It dispossesses a people of all of their production for nothing. For nothing. We get nothing for this. All that's happening, we think, oh, we need this money. Who would lend us money if it weren't subject to interest? We're not borrowing money. We're allowing banks to publish evidence of our promissory obligations and thinking that that's to borrow from the bank as if the bank had it before. And this is just not the case. So it's our own fault that we continually revert to this. We want to revert to this misunderstanding that we're borrowing money from a bank. No. We're allowing them as to be the exclusive publisher of our promissory obligations to each other, and our failure to understand this simple thing, which we've actually explained in several ways now, is our greatest means of destruction, because this is a few people doing this to the entire world, openly lying to us in the news media every day, when we can see right through every lie when we understand this obfuscation of the currency.
And when we talk about this too, when you look at your U.S. Constitution, is it the Constitution that talks about enemies, foreign and domestic?
Right.
Yeah. Well, this is what we're talking. This is the domestic enemy.
And domestic, yes. It's the domestic. Absolutely. You're quite a student of important documents to be versant in that as a Canadian. I have to admit, I couldn't cite you what the Canadian Constitution might say in regard to that.
Unfortunately, ours isn't as. I'm not as proud. I'm proud of what we have, but unfortunately, it's missing a few pieces. But let me point something out. No less than 13 times has America invaded Canada. Are you aware of that?
I know we've had our wars.
It's 13 times, and it makes me think that that the people up here in the north, if they ever wake up, might be of some use to the people in the south. That
Oh,
if things get so bad,
uh-huh.
there might be some sort of I just wonder how it is that the Americans can put off the British army, but they couldn't do it to the Canadians. Not to say anything. I'm just saying that there might be something else going on. That there needs to have been a Canada separate from the States for maybe some unknown reason. I'm just purely speculating, of course.
Well, I'll
That
back you up on
there might be
that.
some use.
I've spent a lot of time in Canada. I used to go up since 1980. I used to fly fish in British Columbia and those
Hmm.
parts as we discussed. And and I have relatives in Canada, and I've got friends in Canada, and particularly back in the 80s, to me, Canadians were remarkably impressive people because, their property was better kept than American property. Um, their homes were nicer in general. They were principled, common sense people. Missourians here are kind of rightly proud of being the show me state. In other words, don't pull any bullshit on me. They're proud of being independent, critical thinkers, and Canadians always impress me that way. And I was always hopeful. I have a similar respect for Australians. Australians are tough people, and
That's right.
you don't pull the wool over their eyes. I used to race sailboats, and I competed with a lot of Australians, and I just, I always, had great admiration for their disposition, and being one of the few Americans to share, that kind of audacity to challenge, the status quo at every turn, not because, I'm just um, uh, a disparate person, but instead because a people who are not willing and fully committed to unravel and understand the issues which affect them cannot be a free people. In other words, we are not even capable of self-government to our own service if we refuse to master such what are truly simple issues as this obfuscation of the currency. We have to understand that these bankers just claim that they have to issue the paper. We're not borrowing money from banks. They create it. All this money didn't exist. And when did they create it? They created it always when we assumed a promissory obligation, and we had to go to them to do it. Because they intervene upon our commerce. We had to go to them to do this.
And
Um,
it's interesting too that you say it is simple. It really is simple. And sometimes when I'm discussing with people what's going on, and I mention that we're now working with Mike in this perfect economy that we've got here, and they say, well, who's Mike? And often I'll say, well, he's a mathematician and he was a advisor to the Reagan administration, because that's what people want to hear, right? But it's equivalent. It is simple to understand. So much so that a good analogy would be to say, well, my daughter scraped her knee. Oh my goodness, we better go to emergency and have a brain surgeon put a Band-Aid on it. And that's sort of the equivalent thing. Is you don't need to be a rocket science to understand this. You just need to sit back and say, I'm being ripped off,
mhm,
and I need to understand how.
mhm.
And once you get that mindset that you are being ripped off, because there's a natural resistance that, well, I'm not being ripped off. Well, yes, you are. And there's a fundamental reason that touches every part of our lives.
Yes, and I mean, when you say, you repeat that somebody's thinking that I'm not being ripped off, and you're saying yes, you are. My head wants to explode, not with rage, but with, it's like, it's like, it's so unfathomable that someone should think that they have to pay 5 houses to somebody who produces nothing, who gives the paper which represents producing a house to the true creditor and pretends to be a creditor to have given up lawful consideration itself, and therefore by an obfuscation or sleight of hand obligates us to pay them so much as a house just in principle, plus 3 or 4 houses on top of that in purported interest, when all they've done is absorb the negligible, minuscule, practically non-existent costs of issuing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other.
Yeah, and not just to think that, but to actually do it. It's absolutely astounding.
It's to our great discredit, and mark
and
my words, someday in the near future, a much higher people will think back and they will marvel, they will shake their heads.
They will, and I'm very even though I'm in the public eye, I don't pull any punches, and I'll sit in front of an auditorium of 500 people and say things that leave them speechless. After the candidates forum here last night, and this is going to be on the radio too, but I told a couple of people, I said, you know what, if you really understood, if you could go ahead 20 years in the future and look back to what we have now and what they're doing, I don't think you would let some of the people walk out of the room tonight if you really understood what was going on.
Absolutely. Just what are you doing to my children?
Right. The crimes,
your apathy and disinterest.
Right. You would not let them leave the room, at least walking.
And this is something that our mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation accomplishes also. Those people who want to be apathetic, fine, but we are limiting the ramifications of their apathy and disinterest to them. If it's right to accumulate these artificial debts, fine. You go ahead. You pay the bank, but you pay your debts. You don't pass them off onto my children or myself.
Yeah, maybe if we implement,
we're holding our fellow citizens accountable,
That's
which
right.
is something that has to happen, because we have actually divides between generations now. With the oldest generation, got in on the beginning of this and was able to capitalize on it. And though there's no justification for it, they believe that if it ended, they would be stripped of their wealth, and we're not stripping them from their wealth at all. In fact, we'd probably increase their wealth. But they turn off immediately and think, oh, if somebody fixes this whole thing, which they know, they object, and they object viciously and vehemently, because they know that they were wrong, you see, and they attack a proposition of solution to preserve their own unearned taking, which is perpetrated by grafting them to the system, but which they will be stripped of as well when it fails. You see, so they're actually cutting off their nose to spite their face, thinking that, they're preserving what they have to have, they know themselves, to survive, but we're actually going to restore more to them than that in solution. So by denying us the right or opportunity to inform them of how we all get out of this gracefully together by solution, they actually are obstructing solution, which the rest of us depend on direly. Because if you actually do the math on what the person of the average age of 80 in this country, what debt and costs they're unrightfully passing off to future generations, it comes out right now to about $17 million, and that's even conservatively figured, per person, per capita. So that's how much they're costing us, and that's how much their wealth would be impacted to the negative if they were held accountable for this thing, which none of them can justify. And this is why we need to wake up all generations. We have to recognize that it's a crime to pass these debts and this system on to others. It is a crime, and we have rights as sovereign individuals to protect ourselves from this crime, to say, no, this is wrong, we've proven it's wrong. There are irrefutable arguments not only that it's wrong, but that it inevitably results in terminal dispossession and failure, and that there is one and one only solution to it. And by denying us the right, you are committing a crime against us. So the next thing that it's important for us to understand then is how mathematically perfected economy solves all these things. And this is nothing complicated to understand either.